My father raised his glass and smiled at the crowd. More than 40 relatives filled the backyard. Kids ran across the grass, music played softly from a speaker, and everyone seemed to be having a great time. Then my father cleared his throat. "I've made a decision about the family house." The conversation stopped instantly. He placed a hand on my younger brother Ryan's shoulder. "One day, this house will belong to Ryan." Applause erupted around the yard. Ryan grinned. My mother wiped away a happy tear, and I sat there in complete silence. The house was worth nearly $2.5 million. 3 years earlier, my parents had almost lost it. When they needed help, they called me. Not Ryan, me. I spent months helping them through their financial crisis and making sure the house stayed in the family. I never asked for credit. I never expected praise, but I certainly never expected this. Then my father looked directly at me. "Of course we appreciate everything Emily did for us." A few relatives nodded politely. That was it. Years of sacrifice reduced to a single sentence. Across the yard, I noticed my grandfather sitting quietly at a table by himself. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't smiling. In fact, he looked disappointed. At the time, I thought he was upset about my father's announcement. I had no idea he was about to change everything. My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of how my father publicly humiliated me, gave my brother the family home, and how my grandfather revealed a secret that nobody saw coming. Growing up, Ryan had always been the favorite. My father praised everything he did. If Ryan succeeded, it was celebrated. If I succeeded, it was expected. Over the years, I stopped trying to compete for attention and focused on building my own life. I moved away, built a successful career, and learned to rely on myself. Still, I never stopped showing up when my family needed me. Which is exactly why what happened at that reunion hurt so much. Because this wasn't really about the house. It was about finally realizing that no matter how much I gave, I would never be enough in my father's eyes. At least, that's what I believed before my grandfather stood up and spoke. And when he did, the entire family reunion changed forever. 3 years before that reunion, my father called me late one night. For the first time in my life, he sounded afraid. The family was drowning in debt, and the house was at risk. I didn't hesitate. I spent weeks helping my parents find a way out of the crisis. Eventually, the house was saved. My father thanked me. My mother promised they would never forget what I had done. But they did. As time passed, everything went back to normal. Ryan remained the center of attention, and my contribution slowly disappeared from every family conversation. Then one day, my mother called. "We're having a big family reunion," she said. "Your father has an important announcement." I asked what it was. She refused to tell me. A few days later, my grandfather called. Unlike everyone else, he got straight to the point. "Come to the reunion, Emily." Something in his voice made me pause. "Why?" "Just trust me." So I did. The morning of the reunion, I drove back to my hometown. The backyard was already full of relatives when I arrived. Everyone seemed excited. Everyone except my grandfather. He was sitting quietly by himself, watching the crowd. When I walked over to greet him, he squeezed my hand and said something strange. "Stay until the end." I laughed. "Why does everyone keep acting so mysterious?" He smiled. "Because some truths take time to arrive." At the time, I had no idea what he meant, but a few hours later, my father would stand in front of the entire family and make an announcement that would change everything. The reunion felt normal at first. Relatives filled the backyard, children ran across the grass, and everyone gathered around tables covered with food. My father spent most of the afternoon shaking hands and telling stories. Ryan stayed close to him the entire time, just like always. A few relatives asked about my job, but most conversations eventually returned to Ryan, Ryan's plans, Ryan's future, Ryan's business. I was used to it. By late afternoon, everyone had finished eating. That's when my father stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. The backyard slowly fell silent. A smile spread across his face. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he began. A few people applauded. Then he started talking about family, about legacy, about hard work, and about keeping traditions alive. Something about his tone made me uneasy. I glanced toward my grandfather. He sat quietly at the far end of the yard, watching, waiting. My father continued speaking, then he placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. The crowd smiled, and suddenly I knew exactly where this was going. What I didn't know was just how far he was about to take it. I straightened in my chair as my father looked around the yard. "This family has always believed in rewarding loyalty," he said. Then his eyes landed on me. For a brief moment, the smile on his face changed, and the next words out of his mouth would leave the entire family staring at me. My father looked directly at me, then he smiled. "Some children stay and build a legacy," he said. "Others choose to leave." A few people laughed. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly who he was talking about. My father turned toward Ryan and placed both hands on his shoulders. But Ryan stayed. Ryan helped carry this family forward. The applause started almost immediately. My mother wiped tears from her eyes. Ryan looked proud. Then came the announcement. "That's why I've decided that one day this house will belong to Ryan." The backyard erupted with cheers. Several relatives stood and congratulated him. Someone raised a glass. Someone else shouted, "Well deserved!" I sat completely still. The house was worth nearly $2.5 million, and my father had just given it away in front of 40 people as if I didn't exist. Then he looked at me one more time. "Of course, Emily helped us during a difficult time," he said casually. "We're grateful for that." That was it. One sentence. Years of sacrifice reduced to a footnote. The crowd quickly moved on, but I couldn't. I felt every eye drifting toward me, waiting to see how I would react. Would I argue? Would I leave? Would I cry? I did none of those things. Instead, I slowly stood up. The applause faded. The conversations stopped. My father frowned. "Emily," he said quietly, "sit down." I looked around the yard, then I looked at him. "No, Dad," I replied. "I think it's finally time everyone heard the whole story." For the first time all afternoon, the smile disappeared from his face, and across the yard, my grandfather slowly leaned forward in his chair, almost as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The entire backyard fell silent. My father stared at me. "Emily, don't do this," he said. I ignored him. Instead, I looked around at the relatives who had spent the last few minutes celebrating Ryan's inheritance. 3 years ago, I began, my parents almost lost this house. Several people exchanged surprised looks. Most of them clearly didn't know. My father called me and asked for help. The mortgage was falling behind, bills were piling up, and the house was at risk. My father's face tightened. "That's enough." "No," I said calmly, "it's not." I continued. "I spent months helping solve the problem. I used my time, my money, and my resources to help save this property." The crowd was listening now. Nobody was eating. Nobody was talking. Even Ryan looked uncomfortable. "I never asked for recognition," I said, "but hearing Dad act like I had nothing to do with this house isn't fair." My mother suddenly stood up. "Emily, this is family business." I nodded. "Exactly. And Dad just made it public." A few relatives looked away. Others stared directly at my father. For the first time, people were hearing a side of the story they had never heard before. Ryan finally spoke. "Nobody said you did nothing." I looked at him. "Really?" He didn't answer, because he knew I was right. For years, every sacrifice had been ignored. Every contribution had been forgotten. Every success had been treated like it mattered less than simply being the son who stayed home. The silence became uncomfortable. My father looked angry. My mother looked embarrassed. Ryan looked trapped. And then something unexpected happened. My grandfather slowly stood up from his chair. The moment he rose, every head in the yard turned toward him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry either. He simply looked disappointed. Then he reached down and picked up a large brown envelope that had been resting beside his chair all afternoon. And the second I saw it, I knew he had been waiting for this moment all along. My grandfather walked slowly toward the center of the yard. The brown envelope remained tucked under his arm. Nobody spoke. Even my father looked uncertain. When Grandpa finally stopped beside the table, he looked directly at my father. "For years," he said quietly, "I've watched this family reward the wrong things." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, this isn't necessary." "Oh, it is." Grandpa opened the envelope and removed several documents. Then he held them up for everyone to see. 2 years ago, I updated my estate plan. The crowd exchanged confused looks. My father frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" Grandpa's answer came immediately. "Everything." He turned toward the family. "Most of you think my savings amount to a small retirement account in a cabin." A few people nodded. Grandpa smiled slightly. "You're wrong." The backyard became completely silent. Over the next few minutes, he explained something nobody expected. For decades, he had quietly invested money. Rental properties, stocks, land, assets he had built without ever talking about them. The total value shocked everyone. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Ryan looked stunned, and my father simply stared. Then Grandpa delivered the real surprise. "I have chosen one person to oversee everything when I'm gone." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My father looked hopeful. Ryan sat up straighter. Then Grandpa turned and pointed directly at me. "Emily." The word hit the yard like thunder. Several relatives gasped. My father's face went pale. Ryan looked completely shocked. Grandpa folded his hands behind his back. "I didn't choose Emily because she's my granddaughter." He looked around the crowd. "I chose her because she's the only person in this family who consistently puts others before herself." Nobody argued. Nobody could, because everyone had just watched the truth unfold in front of them. Grandpa looked at my father one final time. "You spent years praising the child who stayed." Then he pointed at me. "I value the child who served." For the first time that afternoon, my father had absolutely nothing to say, and the silence that followed was louder than any speech he had given all day. For several seconds, nobody spoke. My father stood frozen beside the table. The same man who had confidently announced Ryan's inheritance now looked completely lost. Ryan stared at the ground. My mother wiped tears from her eyes. And for the first time in years, nobody was looking at me as an afterthought. They were actually seeing me. Grandpa slowly returned to his chair. His message had been delivered. The truth was finally out. A few relatives began whispering among themselves. Others simply sat in stunned silence. Then something unexpected happened. Ryan stood up. He walked over to me and stopped. His eyes were red. "I'm sorry, Emily." The entire yard watched. "I should have spoken up a long time ago." For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I nodded. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a start. A few minutes later, relatives began leaving. The reunion that had started as a celebration ended as a day of reflection. Before I left, my father approached me near the driveway. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain. "I was wrong," he said quietly. The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded, not because everything was fixed, but because acknowledging the truth was the first step. Some wounds heal slowly.
Some never heal completely, but at least the pretending was over.
That evening, before heading home, I stopped by Grandpa's house. He was sitting on the porch watching the sunset. I thanked him. He smiled. Then he said something I'll never forget. People spend their whole lives trying to be noticed, Emily. The right people noticed you a long time ago. A few months later, life looked very different. Ryan started rebuilding his relationship with me. My parents made genuine efforts to change, and Grandpa continued being exactly who he had always been, the wisest person in the family. As for me, I went back to the life I had built on my own, the career, the friends, the future. Because in the end, the greatest victory wasn't the house, and it wasn't the money. It was finally understanding that my worth had never depended on my father's approval. The family reunion ended, the applause faded, the speeches were forgotten, but one lesson remained. Never measure your value by how loudly someone praises another person. Because sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who quietly keeps everything standing while nobody is watching. And eventually, the truth has a way of making itself heard. 6 months passed after the reunion. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The drama faded, but the consequences remained. For the first time in years, my father started calling me regularly. Not because he needed something, not because there was a crisis, just to talk. At first, the conversations were awkward. We had spent so many years pretending everything was fine that neither of us knew how to have an honest relationship. But little by little, things changed. One evening, he called and asked about my work. The next month, he asked about my plans for the future. Then one day, he did something I never expected. He apologized. Not the quick apology people give to end an argument. A real apology. He admitted that he had spent years measuring loyalty by who stayed physically close to home. And in doing so, he had overlooked the person who showed loyalty through actions. For the first time, I believed he truly understood. Ryan changed too. He stopped trying to live up to impossible expectations and started building a life that actually made him happy. Without the pressure of constantly proving himself, he became someone I could finally have a genuine relationship with. As for Grandpa, he remained the anchor holding everything together. Every Sunday I visited him. Sometimes we talked about family. Sometimes we talked about life. Most of the time we simply sat on the porch watching the sunset. One afternoon I asked him a question that had been on my mind since the reunion. "Why did you wait so long?" He smiled. "Because some lessons have to be learned in public." I laughed. Then he looked at me seriously. "Emily, never confuse being appreciated with being valuable. They are not the same thing." Those words stayed with me, because for years I had been chasing appreciation from people who were unable to give it. The moment I stopped needing it was the moment I became free. Looking back now, I don't remember the applause my father received that day. I don't remember the shocked faces. I don't even remember the arguments. What I remember is the moment I realized my worth had never depended on anyone else's recognition. And that's why that reunion changed my life. Not because of the house, not because of the money, but because it finally taught me that the people who truly matter don't just see what you achieve. They see who you are. And sometimes, that's worth more than any inheritance in the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Calm Drama Stories for more unforgettable family drama and life-changing moments.